On today's show, I'm going to talk briefly about the surprisingly civil and substantive vice presidential debate between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. It's very much surprising. As well as we're going to talk about the longshoreman strike that's going on along the entire eastern seaboard from Maine to Texas. With their strike, the head of the longshoremen's union threatens, and I quote, "I will cripple you," referring to the U.S. economy. Seems like a really nice guy. Let's go for it. Welcome to The Homeless Conservative, a show about principled politics for exhausted citizens. I am Blake Fisher, and I'm a political junkie so that you don't necessarily have to be. Thank you for spending a little of your valuable time with me. Voting has already begun in 20 states, which makes like 0 sense to me because it is October 2nd right now as I'm recording this, and we just had the final debate we're going to get to see for this entire presidential campaign. It was the vice presidential debate. We're going to get one of those. We're getting no more presidential ones. So we got to hear one time from Kamala and Trump on the same stage together, and we got to hear once from their VPs. And it looks like that's going to be it. Kamala's doing a little bit more press, not really answering any tough questions, still pretty friendly stuff. She's had a couple gaffes. Tim Walz is not that great on the campaign trail either. If he's not on a teleprompter, it really does seem like J.D. Vance is the only one of these 4 people that's running for the highest offices in the land that has any real political skill whatsoever. He can do a teleprompter speech. He can do a debate, as we learned last night. He can do press junkets. He can do podcasts. Seems like he's the only one able to do this kind of thing. So it seems weird to me that early voting is happening right now in 20 states, like I said. I guess if you've made up your mind, that's great. It just seems like a lot could change between now and then. We've got a war brewing in the Middle East with Iran directly attacking Israel. And I think that's only important to bring up because I did a whole episode about it last week. But since then, tons of things have changed. All these attacks on Hezbollah, they've taken all sorts of leaders. And Iran is now directly attacking Israel for them attacking terrorists that they fund. So this isn't like back the last time in the spring when this happened, when Israel attacked Iran directly because they fired missiles into there and they took out a leader in Iran. It's a little bit different. This is, so we've got that brewing. Seems like that could be a thing. Still have the Russia-Ukraine thing, which a lot of people didn't even get brought up in the debate last night, Ukraine situation, which seemed really strange to me, especially because it's the most stark difference between the two campaigns. We talk about economical stuff. We talk about a lot of things. And Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are largely on the same page on a lot of it. They both want to cut taxes for the middle class. They both want to increase the child tax credit. We've talked about how this is... There's not a lot of daylight between them on a lot of these broad policy things. And that's because they are trying to appeal to as many people as possible because this race is incredibly tight. So, whatever. I guess if you're in one of those early voting states, go for it. It's just, it seems like there's a lot that could happen between now and November 5th where you might go, I'm rethinking voting. I don't know. Maybe I'm totally wrong about that. Plus, I don't know. I just kind of like the voting on election day. Maybe call me old fashioned. Not that I don't do the occasional mail-in ballot kind of thing. But even then I do that week of. I'm not mailing that thing in a month and a half before the actual election. So let's talk about the vice presidential debate. I really struggled to determine if I should even talk about it. I actually never saw numbers for how many people were watching it. I am confident it wasn't as many people as were watching the presidential debate. That was their kind of a lot of people's first time to even get to be introduced to Kamala Harris. Sort of similar last night. I watched it. It was surprising, as I mentioned at the top of the show. But there's a few caveats that we need to talk about first. Debates don't normally matter. And that's normally the thing that you're going to hear from people like me or people that are actual pundits. And this is generally true. Debates don't tend to move the needle a ton. Most people, especially at this point when we're into October, have already made up their minds about one or the other candidates, but there are some undecided voters. I wouldn't call them undecided as much as I think that they are low propensity voters. These are people that are probably not going to come out and vote unless they feel like they have a reason to vote, like some issue that's big enough or a problem that's big enough that they're like, or something they're tired of enough that they go, that's it. I'm going to go out and vote. These are not the people that are partisan. These are not the people that are putting signs in their yard. They're probably not the people that are listening. They're definitely not the people that are listening to podcasts like this or watching cable news. That's the kind of voters that Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are going after right now. And they will probably decide the election. It's a little funny to me that where this is going to come down to maybe tens of thousands of votes. Right now, every poll shows that this race is closer than the last two presidential contests. So in 2020 or 2016, everything showing the polls, when you look back at the polls in 2020, 2016, 2020 had some polling problems for sure. I'm writing off everything that happened in 2020 as COVID specific. You can't really repeat anything. You can't really look to it for stats. You can't look to it for data because so much of the data was so messed up because of the pandemic that we were in, if you remember. So generally, these things don't really move the needle a lot on the election. You go back to 2020 or 2016, it wasn't the debates that moved stuff. It was other news items that may have potentially moved the needle for either one of them. Like, I believe you look at it, and to me, it's clearly that, Donald Trump, people didn't think did a good enough job at handling COVID, and we're kind of sick of the drama. And I'm not sure that a debate would, like, he could have nailed all the debates between him and Joe Biden. I think they only did 2, if I remember correctly. And not sure that that's moving the needle. Well, if presidential debates normally don't matter, then vice presidential debates definitely don't matter, right? Most people don't even know who the current vice president is. That's an exaggeration. It's not most people, but it is a surprising percentage of people that cannot name the vice president of the United States or the Speaker of the House. I mean, vice president, we should know, right? That seems pretty obvious. Well, this year's, not a normal election year. We had a debate that absolutely mattered in June because it got rid of one of the nominees, Joe Biden. So in some ways that debate mattered. And then I think the second debate where we actually had Trump and Harris mattered because I think that there were a significant number of people, something like 80 million people watched it. There's no way some of those people weren't plugged in enough that where they maybe hadn't seen the sort of unhinged version of Donald Trump that we've been getting lately. So I think it mattered. I think it hurt him a little bit in the polls. I think it bumped her a little bit in the polls. Like I said, we're talking just teeny tiny amounts that might not matter at all polling wise because the polls are so tight. It's a coin toss. There is not basically right now, if I had to predict, I could not predict. If you put a gun to my head, I would maybe say Kamala has an edge because she has an edge, I think, in Pennsylvania, and I think that's what this is really all going to come down to, but I would not make that prediction boldly. I certainly wouldn't bet anything of value on that. So the debates have mattered a little bit more this year. And we went into this VP debate last night. Of course, VP debates, an important thing to understand is they're not real because we're not really getting to know these candidates. We're sort of getting to know these candidates with the filter of them sort of behaving like a press secretary for their boss and having to filter everything through, is this going to look bad? Is this going to look like I'm not on the same page as the person that's running at the top of the ticket? So, they can't really totally be themselves. They kind of have to adjust their positions. This has gotten sort of everyone in trouble in some way or another. Kamala Harris is dealing with this now because when she was running for president in 2019, she said all sorts of crazy progressive stuff. And when she became Biden's nominee for vice president, obviously they were like, you can't be against fracking. We've got to win Pennsylvania. A, it's Joe's home state. B, we have to win it. And there's a lot of fracking goes on there. You can't be against fracking anymore. And if she just came out and said that now, maybe people would give her some credit. So, VPs always have to adjust what they're doing and say the right things and kind of fit into the mold of the person that's above them on the ticket. So we imagined going into this, almost every article was like, oh, it's going to be a slugfest. I can't wait to see, because in the last several weeks, both of these guys really only came in the scene. Vance was nominated middle of July. We got Walz, the announcement, I think, like a week or two into August. So they've only been around a little while, but they've basically been attack dogs for the person at the top of the ticket who are better at staying on message than both the people at the top of the ticket. Trump likes to meander down his kind of personal things and really doesn't like to do the things that his campaign tells him to do, like talk about the economy, talk about the things that people care about, stop talking about people eating cats and dogs and what awards you've won and your golf handicap. You're not winning any votes by doing that. He can't stay on message, and Kamala Harris is just bad at it unless it's on a teleprompter. So both the VP candidates have been more, a bigger part of the campaign, I feel like, than in past, because they're just better at it, at being politicians, than Kamala Harris or Donald Trump are. They're just a little more naturally talented. Tim Walz has, of course, been a big attack dog. The whole reason Tim Walz is the vice president nominee is because he called J.D. Vance and Donald Trump weird on a cable news show, and it kind of caught fire. And that's basically he's a TikTok vice presidential candidate nominee. It seems kind of crazy to me. I don't think he has a lot of talent. I don't necessarily, I've said from the get-go, I thought he was a bad choice, and I thought J.D. Vance were a bad choice. And so everyone expected going into this, because all J.D. Vance has been doing and all Tim Walz has been doing is sort of these attack dog situations, especially J.D. Vance. He's going on all the red shows, the very far right kind of stuff, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me campaign strategy-wise, because you're preaching to the choir. I guess it's just trying to turn out base, whatever. I'm not a campaign strategist, so I'm not going to tell them they're wrong. It just seems weird to me when the policies they're presenting are clearly trying to get the lowest common denominator, sort of less likely to vote. It's like trying to get someone that would normally sit on their couch, but you're trying to get them to come out. And so I don't know. I don't think those people are listening to Tucker Carlson's podcast. I don't think they are. I could be wrong about that. Anyway, J.D. Vance has been an attack dog. Tim Walz has been an attack dog. So everyone going into this was like, this is going to be fireworks. It will basically be like a more talented version of the Kamala Harris and Donald Trump thing. And that's what everyone expected going into it. And everyone was totally wrong, because it was civil. It was polite. I heard the words, I agree, and I agree with a lot of what my opponent is saying. It felt like, if you are younger than me, which is, I'm 41, and if you are like Gen Z, let's say, okay, let's just do the math on this. If you're 18 right now, so voting age, you're born in 2006, right? You've never seen a presidential debate that was like normal. You know, this reminded me of a presidential debate from like 2000 or 2004. This doesn't feel like what we've been seeing since 2016, 2020, with, Trump and Harris are both really bad at explaining. Harris has gotten a little bit better at it. They're really bad at explaining things in ways that normal Americans can understand what's going on. So talking about economic issues and explaining, this is why this doesn't work, or this is why there's a problem, and here's a solution. Donald Trump kind of spouts things off as if he expects you to be that you were on Truth Social and Twitter that day and know the meme of the day, and he can reference it. That's just not the majority of the American people. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris and their campaign staffs are way too online. Somehow, now, we'll talk about the individual performances, but like I said, it was polite, it was civil, there was actual substance on almost every question. Sure, there was dodging, like there always is on these things where they ask a pointed question and the person didn't answer it, but not near as much as there was with Trump and Harris. It was weird how refreshing it was. And I don't believe for a second that anyone that watched it, whether they're hyper-partisan or not, didn't think to themselves or say out loud to whoever they were watching it with, why aren't these two people at the top of the ticket? Because they were vastly more talented than the people at the top of the ticket. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are not very good at this. They're not very good at politics. It's clear J.D. Vance is pretty darn good at it after watching him last night. I've seen other stuff of Vance and been unimpressed with him, and we'll talk about why. And Tim Walz was more impressive than Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, but really wasn't that impressive. I mean, it is universal consensus. J.D. Vance won that debate last night, if there's such a thing as a winner and loser. I'm not sure if it changes anything. I'm not predicting that. I'm not saying that anything changed, but it was refreshing. And so I think one thing to keep in mind about that, and I think is worth noting, if you are sort of a political junkie like me, and you go into these debates and you're reading all these articles like what to expect, what questions should be asked, what to expect to hear from this person, everyone's full of crap. Everyone was wrong about the debate last night. Everyone. I didn't see one article that was like, I think they're going to come out and have a nice civil debate and shake hands and have genuine, compassion for the other candidate and stuff. No one predicted that. So if people can't predict what's going to happen in the vice presidential debate, and these are articles that were written yesterday, the day before, 24 to 48 hours before it happens. This is, stuff's leaking from the campaigns that's saying, oh, Tim Walz is kind of nervous. He spoke up front to Kamala Harris when she was talking to him about being the VP that like, I'm not good at debates. And sometimes that stuff is just spin so that we set the bar low and then they meet expectations more easily. But it was very apparent that he's not great at it. It's not his wheelhouse. He doesn't feel comfortable. He seemed kind of nervous and uncomfortable the whole time. And it's just not his thing. I also don't think we should judge our politicians' ability to do a job based on a debate performance. I don't really see how there's a lot that goes from being able to perform really well in a debate to being able to govern. I think those are two totally different skill sets. And I think Ron DeSantis is a good example of this. I think it's clear that he can govern well. Now, you can disagree with him. I disagree with some of his policies and performative stuff for sure. But I mean, it's clear that he can run the executive branch of a state fairly well. And I think this has happened lots of times with people, especially governors. You can be good at the job and not be good at doing debates. And debates are kind of a weird thing. In what other situation is this person ever going to have to be told, hey, I need your opinion on something in 2 minutes. Go. And then give me it. Okay, great. You've changed my mind. That's just never going to happen in the job. But I think they are useful tools. I'm not saying we should get rid of debates. I'm just saying let's grade it on a curve and not immediately disqualify someone just because they look a little nervous or they stumble over their words every once in a while. Let's think about the ideas and the things they're saying. Are they true? Are they good ideas? I think that's what matters in a debate. But even then, take it with a grain of salt. Because if you ask someone, what's your foreign policy going to be in 2 minutes? That's pretty complicated. It's also complicated because we expect these people, and they even mentioned this in the debate last night. They asked them, what's your plan for this? And they kind of said, look, I can't give my plan entirely because I don't have it. Part of what you have to do is work with Congress. You have to figure out what there's an appetite for, what people will compromise on. It's a process. You can't just say, this is my exact plan. Congress will pass it and I will sign it. That's not how this works. And I appreciated that they actually said that on television last night. It was, like I said, it was very refreshing. So, like I said, it was a good thing. I think it was a good debate. I wish we had more like them. The moderators, went into it. The very first thing off the bat, they were like, we're not going to fact check. That's the other candidate's job to fact check the candidates. And I was like, yes, that's absolutely correct. And then they immediately proceeded to keep fact checking JD Vance on stuff that they were wrong about. Just like, CBS made the exact same mistake ABC did. And it's kind of shocking. And JD Vance pushed back on it, to be fair. They tried to fact check him on an immigration thing that they were wrong about, frankly. And JD Vance was correct about, and he interrupted them to say, no. Well, you said you weren't going to fact check, and you are fact checking now. So there's A, that, and B, you're wrong about this. And I think it was the right thing to do. But if you're younger than me, you may have never seen this kind of debate. Over and over, like I said, they agreed with each other. At several points, they pointed out, like, I might disagree with my opponent, but they didn't doubt their sincerity in wanting to solve the problem, which is the exact opposite of Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. All they do is attack the other side's motivations and intentions. And that was not what was happening last night. We discussed abortion in a way that I don't think has been... Vance took it in a way that I think is smart politically. It's not where I am. I don't think it's the right thing to say. I'm a little disappointed that he never said anything like, well, I know that you believe that you're protecting women's rights, but we believe we're protecting children, their lives, not just like their psychological or their job or like, or even just their physical health. Like the child will be dead if we abort them. And I just think that's a simple fact that we have to put out there on the table. we before we talk about any kind of discussion about abortion policy, we have to talk about the fact that it's ending a life, I think. And so I was disappointed that Vance can't even bring that to the table at the debate, but it's smart politically because most of the country's not there, honestly. So he's trying to win an election. I get it. This is normal political stuff. But like I said, it was a debate where they weren't accusing the other of being evil or ill-intended. And I liked that. And I think it was good. You know, there were some parts where there was some genuine sincerity. I actually have a clip of it because it really was, I don't know. It was good. Let me go to this. So this is a clip of Tim Walz is talking about how his son witnessed a shooting. Now witnessed, Tim Walz gets in trouble for exaggerating slightly. I will say that his son was inside a building at a rec center, and there was a shooting outside the building between a staff member and some kids or something. So he didn't witness the actual shooting, but he was there at the location. So I mean, again, either way, the point is J.D. Vance had a pretty good response.
Fix. These are things that shouldn't be that difficult. You can still keep your firearms, and we can make a difference. We have to. If you're listening tonight, this breaks your heart.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting, and I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. So. Christ have mercy. It is awful.
You know, that's just like not that hard to do, and I hope it's sincere. I tend to be very cynical with politicians, if you haven't noticed, and I think that seemed sincere to me, and it was nice because that doesn't happen with Donald Trump ever. He's never shown sympathy for his enemy or opponent ever. I don't think. I mean, not that I remember ever. I'm sure it's happened. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but I don't know. I just felt like that was a moment of we're both trying to solve. None of us want. And Tim Walz had a very similar thing during the same gun debate where he said, "I believe that J.D. Vance doesn't want school shootings to happen any more than I do. I think he thinks they're awful too." And it was just nice to hear people go, I think they have good intentions, and we just disagree about what the solution to the problem is, which is what politics is, which I wish we did more of in this country, is talk to each other and say, where are you coming from? Here's where I'm coming from. Let's find a solution. And that does not exist in most modern politics stuff. So like I said, it was fairly refreshing. I think Vance nailed it. I don't like Vance. I've talked about this. I think he's kind of the worst kind of political shapeshifter because he's good at it. You know, last night he seemed very poised. He had really well thought out answers that he obviously prepped for, something Donald Trump won't do for a debate. And like even when he was dodging a question, he dodged it pretty well. And there's a talent there that I think is missing, like I said, in the other candidates. But I don't know. It's about knowing the audience, I guess. It was an opportunity for not super glued in voters to turn the TV on and be introduced to both of these people. And so in that regard, there's obviously been a lot more negative press about Vance than there has been about Tim Walz. Although for the most part, they're both siloed into the normal thing where it's the mainstream media or the left sort of leaning media that's talking bad about J.D. Vance all the time, and vice versa with the right media about Tim Walz. And the truth is, I think both of the things are exaggerated. I think some of the stuff against Tim Walz, he lies for sure. He is exaggerated on so many occasions to kind of puff up his resume. I don't know that it rises to the level of stolen valor, like some Republicans say. I don't think that's necessarily fair. He was in the National Guard. Yeah, he may have like sort of fibbed about what his retiring rank was, but he did have that rank. He just didn't retire at the rank. You know, there's some of that nuance that's there that I don't feel like the right gives Tim Walz. And the same thing happens on the left with J.D. Vance. But if you were paying attention just very briefly and you were only seeing clips and headlines that were like, J.D. Vance is weird, or J.D. Vance is evil, or J.D. Vance wants to like enslave women. I mean, these are things I've seen I'm barely exaggerating if you read stuff like Vox or any of these kind of news outlets that are just kind of like, he's the devil incarnate. I think if you turned the TV on last night, you'd go, what is the media talking about? This guy doesn't seem weird. He doesn't seem evil. He seems pretty well put together and really smart, and he seems to be kind, like these things. There is some performative measure there, because if you watch JD Vance in some of these interviews on the very far right kind of media, it is more attack dog style, and it's a little more bombastic. And he does say some things that gets him in trouble. And one kind of funny thing about the debate last night is they were talking about, they both have kind of shot their mouth off at some point. Now, I think that's a lame excuse. Tim Walz has lied. It came out yesterday before the debate, and they asked him about it during, that he said he was in China and Hong Kong during the Tiananmen Square massacre. And it turns out he was not. He was there a few months later. I think those things matter. I think that, like I said, he's always just kind of just twisting just little white lies. He's like, he was there a couple months later, but he wasn't there actually in like the famous time when we see the guy in front of the tank, right? And so I think that these matter, and I think to just write him off as gaffes, which sort of both of them tried to do last night, I think was mutually beneficial, but not totally honest. But what concerns me about this, like I said, for JD Vance to go from saying Trump might be America's Hitler to being full-on MAGA a few years later, and kind of full-on populist and kind of spouting all these ideas that I don't even know for sure. I think there's no way, he's a smart guy, I don't think he believes that doing 10% to 20% tariffs across the board will help the economy. I think he knows that won't be a problem potentially. I think this is JD Vance auditioning to run in 2028, win or lose this year. I think it was very clear that that's what was happening last night. And, I wonder if that's the JD Vance that will go on for the next 4 weeks, especially if it starts to look like Donald Trump's going to lose anyway, potentially. But right now, the problem is the polls are so tight, it is a coin toss right now. So he's not going to do anything that's going to totally piss Trump off. But I do think he's clearly looking down the road and saying, I'm running in 2028 no matter what. If Trump wins, he's term limited. I'm running in 2028. If he loses, I'm running in 2028. So let's start building that portfolio right now and getting in front of people. So I've already been talking way too long about this debate that, again, won't really matter in the thing. But if they just would have fought all night, I wouldn't have talked about it at all, probably. But the fact that it was kind of civil, but it does concern me because, like I said, I don't love JD Vance. I think he's he's very opportunistic. He does and says whatever he needs to do to get elected to the Senate. That he comes back and starts kissing Trump's butt to get the nominee, basically get Trump's blessing to be the Ohio nominee and to get to the Senate. And he couldn't have done it without Trump or Mitch McConnell. He would have lost. So he's very opportunistic, and that concerns me mostly because he's very good at it. And that's normal for politicians, but I just still don't know who he is, because the stuff he was saying last night, I don't think he would have agreed with 4 years ago, certainly not 8 years ago. So who do we believe? I don't know which version of him to really trust, but he's very talented at it. He comes off as authentic when he does it. And I think that is, it's good for him, I guess. I think it's bad for me, who's more of a traditional conservative, and I don't like the populist, big government Republican stuff that JD Vance and Donald Trump want to implement. I think it's bad policies. I think it will be bad for the economy. I think it will be bad for Americans. And so I don't like his ideas that he has right now. Some of his past ones, maybe I do, but it's like, which version of JD Vance are we going to get? To me, the only thing that Vance did that to me was bad last night is pretty bad. And that's that he couldn't answer this question honestly.
This was a threat to our democracy in a way that we had not seen. And it manifested itself because of Donald Trump's inability to say. He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future. Did Kamala Harris censor Americans from speaking their mind in the wake of the 2020 COVID situation?
That is a damning non-answer.
I totally agree with that. I think that is disqualifying. To not be able to say that Donald Trump lost the election in 2020, combined with his statement saying he would have done what Mike Pence didn't do, I don't understand how you think that that's okay. I don't understand how Republicans back this. I do not understand how anyone that cares about this country thinks that that's okay. It's not constitutional. There's nothing in the Constitution that says the vice president has the ability to choose a different slate of electors. Do you realize how insane that sounds? Kamala Harris is the VP right now. By the logic of Trump and JD Vance, she could choose which electors she wants and which one she doesn't. So if she doesn't win Pennsylvania, their logic, this is Donald Trump and JD Vance's logic. Kamala Harris could say, oh, no, I'm using this other slate of electors that says I won Pennsylvania and now I'm the president. That's a ridiculous notion to say that Mike Pence had that ability in 2020. It's ridiculous for J.D. Vance to pretend that the vice president has that capability or constitutional power. They do not. Beyond all of that, there is zero evidence that the election was stolen in 2020. Donald Trump has not produced any evidence. None of these organizations have produced any evidence, including True the Vote, who was sued by Georgia, say, give us your evidence. Show us the evidence of the fraud in our state. We need to be able to fix it if there's really fraud. And they had to tell a court, we don't actually have any evidence that there was any, widespread voter fraud in Georgia. And they've had to do that in other states too. And not to mention, you've got the Dominion lawsuit from Fox. You've got, you've got all these organizations that claim the election was stolen, but then they just go, 2000 Mules is the documentary that everyone cites that they've had to pull down the site because they got sued for libel or defamation by someone that was in the film that they claimed was one of these mules stealing votes, stuffing ballots. This is ridiculous. There is no evidence the election was stolen, and Donald Trump will not let it go. J.D. Vance has to say that, yes, the election was stolen. He also knows that's insane to say, so he tries to dodge by saying that Kamala Harris was suppressing people's speech. First of all, there's no evidence that Kamala Harris was doing it. Now, I do think what the White House and social media were doing as far as sort of the pressure that they put on it, I do think that was a First Amendment problem. I don't think the courts got that right. I do think the White House pressuring Facebook, Twitter, social media companies to make sure that they didn't have disinformation or misinformation on their site. And really, I mean misinformation, not because disinformation is different. Disinformation means it's purposely wrong. Like, that's what Russia did, is like saying, oh, here's some information we know is wrong, but it's to seed down. Misinformation could just be someone posts something. They may know it's wrong. They may not know it's wrong. But, there was a lot of this with COVID that ended up not really being misinformation. It was labeled misinformation at one point to say that the virus could have come from a lab leak in China. Well, now that's the prevailing theory of most of the intelligence agencies, not all of them. But there's quite a bit of evidence that that's probably what happened with COVID. But at one point it was you couldn't talk about it. And there were social media companies restricting that kind of speech. But that is social media companies. They are not the government. They're not restricting speech. Anyway, that's a whole tangent. The point is, him not being able to say that Donald Trump lost the election is disqualifying to me. Because again, why would I trust you on anything if you're going to lie to me about that? Something as big as Donald Trump tried to stage a coup and trying to say that he said, well, peacefully and like January 6th, and all, it doesn't matter what Donald Trump said. He tried to steal the election. He was unsuccessful. So yeah, of course he transferred the power peacefully on January 20th. He didn't have a choice. He tried to steal it, though. This is a ridiculous qualification. And to me, it doesn't matter that the entire rest of the debate before that, he performed well. To me, that's just like, you're done. You're disqualified. I cannot vote for someone that believes the election was stolen in 2020. But here's the other thing. Tim Walz did not perform that well. I think that this happily proves my point that he was a bad choice. He was okay, but he looked nervous. He was constantly scribbling notes on his thing and looking down and kind of looking befuddled. One article I read said it kind of looked like Barney Fife. And it did, kind of. He just looked uncomfortable. He got more comfortable as it went on. But still, when they asked him about, like, hey, you said you were in Hong Kong during that massacre, but it turns out you weren't. And he kind of rambled for a couple minutes, but meandered, but he never really answered why. And then he was just kind of like, what did he call himself a knucklehead or something? And get stuff wrong sometimes, instead of just being like, he could have said anything. He could have said, I misremembered the timeline. That happens sometimes. Memory is weird. That does that to people all the time. It could have really just been a memory lapse. He could have blamed it on that. Instead, he just kind of meandered. Walz is not very good at this. I don't see how he's really helping that ticket that much. And then there's also something really weird where they can't decide if they want to embrace and be proud of Biden's record, or do they have to be the change element? Because obviously Trump and Vance are just going after them constantly, saying, hey, Kamala Harris has been the vice president for the last 3 years. She is part of the current administration. She has all these things she says she wants to do. Why haven't they done them in the last 3.5 years? And so it's kind of this weird thing. I've said for weeks that, to me, the only way to, for sure, Kamala Harris to win this race is to totally throw Biden under the bus. In fact, I think she should be doing stuff like trying to invoke the 25th Amendment I really don't think Biden should still be the president. I don't think he's mentally capable of doing it. I think Kamala Harris should be the president right now. And then, we can have an election to see if we want to keep her or not. But I think she should go all in on attacking Biden and throwing him under the bus. And even if you want to do it in a way that's be like, his mental capabilities are not there anymore and he hid it from me. I don't care what happens. I mean, it would just be smart politically to throw him under the bus, but they won't do it. They're trying to have their cake and eat it too here. They're trying to be proud of his record, but run away from it at the same time. And I'm not sure it's working. It will only work if Donald Trump continues to be such a bad candidate and not work hard and not stay on message. But I think that at this point, either one of those things could happen. So again, I just doubt anyone that watched that last night didn't go, even with Walz, who was not a great performance. I bet people were kind of going like, oh, this seems like the better person to be at the top of the ticket. Because even though Walz wasn't very good at it, he was better at it than Kamala is if she's not totally prepared for the question, if that makes sense. So it's kind of a weird thing. So let's move on to sort of our first October surprise. These tend to happen in October, which is why, again, why do we have early voting a month and a half before the election? I don't know, because these kind of things always come out in October. I don't think anyone had this on the bingo card, though, because what we've got is a strike, a union strike, and you would normally go, why does this matter at all if there's a strike? Well, it is the longshoremen's union, specifically the East Coast version. So this is a union that does all the shipping stuff. So every export and import goes through these people if it goes off the the East Coast. And that's really from the Gulf of Texas all the way up to Maine. So it's a lot of land, right? I think those shipping ports are responsible for 56% of the shipping containers that go in and out of the United States, and they've now gone on strike. These are very important to the economy, okay? So everything that's shipped in or out of the country on the East Coast is dealing with this. It's like 45,000 workers, I think, or something. It's a lot. And they rejected a 50% raise over the next 6 years. These are people that have a base salary of $81,000 a year. But a lot of them make $150,000, $200,000 a year. And they're specifically pissed off because what they want is they did not want a 50% raise. They want a 77% pay increase. Please tell me the last one. Raise your hand if you've ever gotten a 77% pay increase over 6 years, to be fair. So it is spread out, but that's still a lot. That is more than 12% a year. That's way more than most people get on raises. That's way above the rate of inflation. And look, I'm not saying they don't do hard work, but the other thing that they're trying to avoid specifically is any kind of automation. So most ports in the world use some form of automation, robotics combined with human beings, and they're much more efficient. In fact, the U.S. ports are the slowest in the world. We remove and add containers at a slower rate than almost any port in the entire world. It's part of the reason we don't do manufacturing here. Because if you manufacture it here, all of a sudden the logistics are a nightmare because you can't get it out of the country fast enough. China has this on lockdown. They have ports. Their biggest port is entirely automated. Well, I mean, I'm sure they have human beings, but it's a lot of automation, and they're way faster because of it. And so therefore it makes sense to manufacture in China because you can get that stuff out the door faster and to places where you can sell it. Okay. There's just some basic stuff going on here. So the union wants a 77% pay increase over 6 years, and they're fighting any kind of automation. Okay. You can see why we're the slowest ports in the world, right? But here's the problem with this. And you're like, okay, again, why does this connect to politics? Okay. It's because if this goes on for very long, that stuff just sits on the ship. So today, because they're on strike, there are a bunch of containers with cars, with food, with clothing, with basically anything that comes from anywhere else in the world right now, or if it's trying to get out of the country too. It's the same thing. It's just sitting on ships, right? They won't unload it. Oh, I guess if it's going out of the country, it probably already got loaded and those ships are out. But those containers are not going anywhere. They're just going to sit on the shore. They're not going anywhere, okay? If that goes on for several weeks, you will start to see shortages. You will start to see, like bananas, for example, something we import. We don't really grow in America. You might not see bananas at the store. Or if you do see bananas, you're going to see the price hike on them. During the 4 weeks leading up to the election, my belief is that if you start to see any kind of shortages or prices increase, Biden and Harris are going to get the blame for it. And to be fair, they are the very pro-union ones. They're the ones that are like, yay, unions. But then when a union does something like this, holds the U.S. economy hostage, I think they're going to get the blame for it. That's just what I think would happen. So I do think this could affect the election, and it's something totally outside of their control. But it's going to look, like I said, if you lend support to them, if you say you're pro-union and you like this, and so far Biden has said he does not want to implement, oh my gosh, I just forgot the name of it. It's basically this rule that the president can do and get Congress involved that says, okay, you can't strike right now. You got to give a 80-day cooling off period where you go back to work and Taft-Hawley, that's what it's called. And you have to go back to work while you negotiate because this is too crucial a part of the U.S. economy. He said he doesn't want to do that now. I think because he wants to appear to be pro-union and maybe he doesn't really care if Kamala wins. I don't know. But here's the thing. This is the clip of the head of the union, okay? This is what he said going into this strike.
When my men hit the streets, from Maine to Texas, every single port will lock down. You know what's gonna happen? I'll tell you. First week, be all over the news every night, boom, boom. Second week, guys who sell cars can't sell cars because the cars ain't coming in off the ships. They get laid off. Third week, malls start closing down. They can't get the goods from China. They can't sell clothes. They can't do this. Everything in the United States comes on a ship. They go out of business. Construction workers get laid off because the materials aren't coming in. The steel's not coming in. The lumber's not coming in. They lose their job. Everybody's hating the longshoremen now because now they realize how important our jobs are. Now I have the president screaming at me, I'm putting a Taft-Hartley on you. Go ahead. Taft-Hartley means I have to go back to work for 90 days. That's a cooling off period. Do you think when I go back for 90 days, those men are going to go to work on that pier? It's going to cost the company's money to pay their salaries. Well, they went from 30 moves an hour maybe to 8. They're going to be like this. Who's going to win here in the long run? You're better off sitting down and let's get a contract and let's move on with this world. And in today's world, I'll cripple you. I will cripple you, and you have no idea what that means. Nobody.
Yeah, that sounds really nice, right? That doesn't sound mob-like at all. I mean, the accent and everything is so perfect. The gold chain, if you're watching. I mean, he's saying, I will cripple you, talking about people losing their jobs, places going out of business, so that they can get a 77% raise and make sure that their jobs don't get replaced by any kind of technology. Raise your hand again if you have a job that has been totally safe from all technological advance. I just think that's a ridiculous thing to want in today's economy, is to be like, oh, I don't ever want technology to possibly replace my job. This would be like horse and buggy people complaining about the automobile. It seems really ridiculous to me. So this was Kevin Williamson's piece this morning on the Dispatch. This is what he said about this specific situation. I'd like you to imagine those words were spoken by a banker instead of a union boss, a banker who controls all access to credit and funds in the nation's ports and who therefore has the power to shut them down because he has a monopoly, not a phony baloney monopoly that means he has 45% of the market share in some important business, but a real monopoly, one created by the government in the form of a law that says everybody at the ports has to do business with that bank. That kind of monopoly is what the Longshoremen's Union has, and what many other unions have too. A monopoly created by politicians for the benefit of their political clients. Unions are supposed to enjoy the privileges that they have because they serve an important public interest. Yeah, this is absolutely a monopoly, and for the Biden administration to be going so hard after companies claiming they're breaking antitrust laws, when I think that you have to squint pretty hard to see how that's happening. They're doing this with drug manufacturers, with basically every tech company. They're going after them. They're losing some of them. They're winning some of them. I think we've gone too far on some of the claiming things are monopoly. Meanwhile, here are a group of workers that absolutely can crush the United States economy leading up to an election to get the 77% raise they want and to make sure that like they're never, ever encroached on by any sort of technological advances that would make us better at shipping stuff in and out, make us more friendly to manufacturing. And this is where Trump stuff comes in, where it doesn't make any sense to me. Trump and Vance are so pro-manufacturing, and the Democrats are too, They claim that we're not manufacturing stuff anymore, which is not really true. We are manufacturing a lot of stuff. It's just that there are fewer jobs in manufacturing because there's more automation, there's more robotics, there's more things like that going on. But we are outputting more than we have in the past. There's just fewer jobs in those places. However, that being said about this, it's clear that Biden's not anti-monopoly. They're pro-monopoly if it's a union that has the monopoly. If it's a teachers union, they're pro-monopoly. If it's the longshoremen's union, they're pro-monopoly. I don't have a huge problem with unions existing. I'm not, like, in some situations, if automobile workers or Amazon or someone like that wants to, if they want to unionize, I think you're seeing that more and more people are opting out of that because they see that maybe the benefits don't outweigh the cost for them. And so there's a lot of people that are just going, I'd rather not be in a union because I weighing the cost benefits, and I don't like the costs versus the benefits. And so fewer and fewer people are in unions. Like I said, don't have a problem if like, there's nothing that the United Auto Workers could do. If they strike, I'm like, great, I don't care. I'll go buy a Honda instead. I have that option. We do not have another option. If the longshoremen strike, everything either has to go to the West Coast, which they did this last year, the West Coast longshoremen. So we don't have another option. You either have to move everything logistically, and it doesn't matter if that stuff came from the east of us. It's just sitting on a ship somewhere, and it costs a lot of money, and it will cost United States if this goes on, it will cost consumers. It will cost other people their jobs. It will cost businesses. This is a problem. It's a monopoly. It needs to be treated as such. But Biden and Democrats have no interest in doing that. So I think that this will potentially, if it goes on, they might clear this up in the next couple days, and no one will ever feel anything really about this because it'll just be a couple days of backlogs. But everything I read is like, you won't see stuff not on the shelves in the next 2 weeks. But if this goes on for like 2 or 3 weeks, you will start seeing stuff not showing up on shelves. You'll start seeing prices go up. Because, for example, if we have to ship something from Europe, for example, they're going to have to now ship that around, through the canal and to get to the West Coast. That's a longer shipping route, which means all that stuff's going to be more expensive when it comes off the ship. So we will see prices go up if this goes on. That guy sounds like a mobster. And in fact, the longshoremen have a history of being connected to the mob. And there's a lot of nepotism that goes on where people, give the higher up sort of stuff to their kids. Some people have to pay to get into this union. So they actually pay to go work because that's how desirable these jobs are. Because like I said, some of these guys are pulling down $200,000 a year to work on the docks. That's insane. And if the job is really that hard and it's worth that much money, fine. His point is that the shipping companies are making a lot of money. I'm fine with workers saying we deserve a piece of that. I just think that there should not be a way that they can actually shut down the United States economy to get what they want. It seems really bad. And like I said, if it goes on, I think it will hurt the Democrats. They're the ones that are very, very buddy-buddy. Joe Biden, I think, was the first president ever to join a picket line this last year. And I don't see how Kamala Harris gets away from that. I don't think how she's going to be able to distance herself from Joe Biden's supportive unions and her supportive unions if a union ends up crippling the United States economy. And that's what they're threatening right now. It's a giant, expensive bottleneck, okay? We've got to improve our ports. We've got to improve the speed, no matter the outcome of this thing. If we really think China is a threat, and if we really want to get manufacturing ramped up in the United States, if Trump is serious about it, if Kamala is serious about it, then you have to fix the ports because companies are not going to manufacture stuff here if it takes longer to get that stuff out of the United States and to the consumers that want it in other countries than they'll do in China because it's fast in China right now. Okay? 77% raise. Have you ever gotten a 77% raise over 6 years? I doubt it. And of course, by the way, it should be brought up. Let's just say this goes on for a little bit and Trump gets elected and he wants to slap a 10 to 20% tariff on all those imports. Buckle up for more inflation. I don't think inflation will be over if this kind of stuff keeps going. And this is not me trying to like fearmonger or say the world is crashing down. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying these things have real consequences and trade-offs. And we have to think about those things big picture. We really have to think about what do we need our ports to do? Because this is important stuff. Most people never think about their stuff coming off a shipping container. And I understand that. We just go to the store and we buy the thing. But if it doesn't say made in the USA, it came in on a shipping container. That guy's right. And if that's shut down, by the way, it's also we're leading into Christmas and all that kind of fun stuff, shopping season. So, which is, by the way, that's when the West Coast did theirs too, kind of pre-Christmas to try to, obviously there's more pressure to negotiate at that point. So we'll see. I think this stuff will matter. I tend to try to only talk about stuff that I think will matter in 30 days. It's not that I so much think the vice presidential debate will matter. I just think it mainly matters from a J.D. Vance standpoint. He will be running in 2028 for sure. I don't necessarily think it moved the needle on it. So thank you for joining me on this episode of The Homeless Conservative. I appreciate you spending your valuable time with me. Really do. The best thing you need from me right now, if you go to thehomelessconservative.com and sign up for my email list, that's just where I can send you stuff that says, hey, I've got a new video out, or here's a new podcast out, or I could send a survey that says, what do you want to hear more of? I'm still kind of playing with the format of this thing. So thehomelessconservative.com is where you can do that. You can reach out to me at blake@thehomelessconservative.com. You can also follow on Instagram and YouTube and all those fun places. That's it for me. I will catch you next time.